Hello guys, back for part two of building the Rebel Privateer. Since part one, what I have been working on is addressing a couple issues on the frame. First issue was increasing the surface area for the skin to be applied to the frame. So as I started thinking about it, I didn't think I had enough surface area for each of these frames. So the thickness of the plastic of the frame itself is about 2 millimeters. And what I was envisioning would happen is that I would be applying the skin so that it covered a couple of pieces of frame and that each piece of skin would butt up against each other. So, for example, if I started from here, I would have a piece of skin cover this frame, and this frame. And then I would have a second piece of skin covering from this frame to this frame to this frame. The only issue is 2 millimeters didn't seem like it was enough when I have this piece of skin butt up against this piece of skin. So what I did was I glued on these little chunks of plastic onto the frame. So I increased the surface area from 2 millimeters thick to almost 6 millimeters thick. That should be enough surface area for when I start gluing the skin onto the frame. So that was the first thing I had to do. So I did it for both the underside, we're looking at the underside right now, as well as the top side. So the second thing I had to address was the gun ports on the port and starboard sides. Unfortunately, they weren't square for each side. Um, the side pieces like here and here seemed to be going in, so it started wide and then it was narrowing down here. After measuring it, what I ended up settling on was 3 16 inch wide area for each side. So I ended up having to break a little bit of the frame, adjust it just slightly, and then glue it in place. The other thing I added was this piece of plastic to the gun ports. So this will end up becoming the place where I'll be gluing or attaching the guns themselves. So what I'm envisioning will happen is, and I'm going to use this tube as an example. So this is my 2 3/4 inch tube that I'm actually going to be using for the cockpit. But what would happen is I would attach the tube here and then on the other side as well. So I needed some surface area to be able to attach the gun to. So I ended up gluing this piece of plastic here. It's now square. Also, it's the same length from the back of this to the start of the edge of the circle. So that is about 1 1/4 inch on each of these, on both the top and bottom side. So at this stage, I've almost set myself up to start skinning the model. And what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to start skinning the underside and leave the top side open for now. That way I can run any wiring through and I have plenty of area to work with for running that wire. So I want to get the skinning in place to at least settle in the frame area itself before I start doing anything else. This will make it a lot more solid. The only thing that's outstanding in terms of addressing the frame is these pieces that are on the outside of the circle are actually, and I don't know if I'll be able to get it in enough here, but you can see it's sort of sagging in the middle. So I'm going to be gluing a couple of pieces of plastic along the side here just to shore up those that space so that it's equal on in terms of height for each of these pieces of plastic on the outside. That also will add just a little bit more surface area for when I start adding the plastic around the side here for the trench. So yeah, so skinning's going to be next, and that should allow me to have this frame nice and solid. The other thing I had to address was the inside of the circle here. Um, this unfortunately wasn't, uh, well, how should I put it? It really wasn't enough, uh, smooth enough on the inside. So I took my Dremel and smoothed it out, because what I want to do is the guns for both the top and bottom are going to have be inserted inside here. That's why I have a little bit of space from the top of this piece of plastic down to the beginning of the tube. So I'm going to be inserting the tube inside. So it'll be the 5-inch tube going inside. And that should prevent any sort of light leaking ultimately when I build these guns in place. And I couldn't get the 5-inch tube inside here because of the fact that, for whatever reason, I thought the plastic had plenty of room on the outside since I'm gluing it on the outside of the 5-inch tube, but I was wrong. So I ended up just dremeling this around the circle on just the white plastic itself. So test fitted it with the 5-inch tube, goes in nice and snugly now. So it's in a good spot for that area. So when I come back, I'm hoping to have started the skinning process on the underside. Hey guys, so I started the skinning process on the frame, but before I started with that, I ended up cutting a section of the 5-inch tube, and this is going to be the gun turret. And I've just got a reminder that the top of it's going to be here. And what I needed it for was when I started to add the skin onto the frame, I wanted to make sure it rested up against that gun turret, and I could get the gun turret in and out as needed. So what I'm using for the skin itself is polystyrene. This type of plastic is real flexible, and it really conforms well to the frame. Now you'll notice that there's some gaps in the frame. I'll have to address those once I get all the skin on. But in the meantime, one thing I like about using this polystyrene is that once I apply CA glue to the frame and then put the skin down on top of it, it really does a good job of matching the frame. I've noticed that there's a little bit of wrinkling going on in sections. I kind of like that appearance. It makes it look like so far that this is a used vehicle. Ultimately, what will end up happening is it'll be covered with plating on this on the top of the skin. So that should probably lessen a little bit of the buckling that appears to be happening in some areas. As I said, these gaps are going to have to be addressed, and then I'm going to have to sand it all down and make it somewhat smooth before I apply the plating. So I'll go over how I'm cutting these pieces in a second, but with this polystyrene, you definitely need to use CA glue. Model glue is not going to adhere this material to the frame. One thing I am noticing that once I apply the skin onto the frame, this is a very solid thing now. Before, some of these frame pieces would start falling off. Now that it's adhered to the skin, they're not falling off. The other thing I'm doing is I'm doing in sections that cover multiple areas. That way I have it much more of a smooth process around the circle. So I'll go over a second how I am setting this up so that it's circular in the pattern, like I have on the end here. And it's actually pretty simple. So when I started with the skin, I built this really simple tool. It's just a extra piece of plastic styrene I had left over, but it's long enough for my purposes of doing a quarter circle on this styrene. So what I did was I drilled holes and I marked off on this different areas of the tube as well as the framing. So this hole right here represents the middle part of that 5-inch circle. Down to here, which is about 2.5 inches, which is the outer edge of the 5-inch tube. And then I have a frame at 2 inches. So that's from the outer edge of the tube to 2 inches, roughly, to 4 inches, to 6, and then to 8 inches. So, so what this allows me to do is that I can have this swing like this, so that I can do that half circle or quarter circle, whatever it turns out to be, on this piece of sheet styrene. Now the styrene is 30 centimeters long, so I just need to know where the center of the styrene is. In this case, it's at the 15 millimeter or 15 centimeter mark. So I just mark that off at 15. And I'm using the grid on my mat to align where the center of the styrene is. So a couple of tools that I'm using to cut this out. Using a pencil to draw the line initially. Using this awl to hold the pivot for the middle of the circle on the 5-inch tube. And then I'm using this scribe to then scribe the circle in once I'm satisfied that I have it drawn out correctly. And then finally, I'm using my knife to actually cut it out. So I'll go over how I'm doing it. So I take this, and as I said, this is the center. So I know where the center is going to be. So now for this outer skin on my model, I need to be, the inner part of the circle is going to be at 4 inches. The outer part actually going to cut a little bit more than the 8 inches. I just want to have a little bit of overlap so that I can trim it back. So that's where I drew this hole here. So what I'm going to do is use the awl and put it roughly right in the middle. I think that's about right, the circle there. And then just pivot this up. So that's at the 4-inch mark right there. And the 8 inches are, I probably want to go up just a little bit more. Yeah, I want to go up a little bit more because I need to have, I want to actually cut it where this outer hole is. So it's going to go right up there. So now with my 4-inch and my awl in place, it's just a matter of just drawing the line like that. And now the outer line like that. So that's about where it's going to be for, so this is probably about, what, 4 inches? A little over 4 inches. It's about, a little over 4 1/4. All right, so now I'm going to take my scribe and actually just scribe the line. And as you can see, I have the piece of styrene taped down. The reason being is I don't want this flying all over the places. I'm actually scribing the line and then cutting it. So there we go. And here. I found that scribing it actually made it a lot easier when it comes to cutting it, because now I got a line I can use as my guide. And I like to scribe it really deep. I don't need to have it. Oh, moved a little. There we go. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be pretty close to being perfect. for my purposes anyways. As I said, the pieces aren't attached to each other or up against each other 100%. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of, I'm going to have to use a little bit of filler to fill that in. All right, so now I got that taken care of. Now it's just a matter of cutting this out. That's why I'm scribing it first. It's a lot easier with it scribed. And I just have the knife follow the little line in there. One thing I've noticed that because my frame is not 100% circular, unfortunately, it's either a little bit of gap or I end up having to cut some back. Most of the time I've been just trimming it back, which is fine. I'd rather have a little bit more than a little bit less. So it's almost ready to go. Just run this through probably twice more. There we go. It's almost ready to come out. Perfect. Now I just got to do the outer one here. Unfortunately, you end up with a lot of plastic left over doing this. But as I said, this stuff is so flexible. It's worth using it as opposed to sheet styrene. Though I could probably go with sheet styrene. This is like, I think this is about a millimeter thick, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't want to make it too thick, but I also didn't want to make it too thin either. So I think about a mil seems to be about right. It's almost ready to come off. All right. Okay. So, give me a second. Get everything out of the way here, and I'll move this up and get the model. Okay. So as you can see, a little bit of trimming is going to be needed if I was to use this entire piece, but I'm not. I'm actually going to just cover like I did the other side, like this side. I'm only going to do from this frame over to here. What I'll do later is I'll cut some other pieces and put them over on the side here. So at this point, I'm going to use this as my reference and lay down the center of the, seems to be about right there. That's one line. So center there, just like to measure it a couple of times just to make sure. Yeah, probably start all over and do it again. So I need to have, I really want the center of this. So a second here. All right. So I drew a couple lines on, so I'll get this out of the way. And just cut this. See how that turned out. It's not very elegant, or not really fun, I guess. Just cutting and gluing pieces of styrene. But in this case, I need to have the skin lay down before I can do anything else. So let's see how that looks. Yeah, it's about right. That takes care of that side. Now do the same thing here. So I'm going from this frame over to this frame. So actually where that cut mark is up above is probably about right. Takes care of that. And that looks like about right. A lot of work just for one piece of plastic, but necessary. So if I did it right, I got the angle about right there. There we go. Now it's just a matter of making sure I did it right, or I wasted a piece of plastic. Yeah, perfect. So it's right in the middle of the frame, right where I want it to be. Perfect, perfect. So so at this point, it's just a matter of taping it on, flipping it over, and then I need to cut a box out here. The end result is going to end up being this right here. So it's just a matter of just drawing that box, cutting it, and then seeing how it looks. You'll notice that this piece of plastic actually extends over the edge of the frame. I wanted to do that just to have a little bit extra. That way I can, knowing that these circles aren't perfect, or at least my frame is not perfectly circular, it just allows me to trim it back a little. And I'd rather have a little bit more than a little bit less in this case. So yeah, I got another piece to cut and to glue. So when we come back, hoping to have all the skin onto the frame, and then move on to the next plans for this. Well, this was a little bit more work than I was anticipating. Since my last update, I finished adding the black plastic skin onto the frame and addressed the front section of the Rebel Privateer. So the solution I came up with was to add these mandibles, which I was always going to do anyways, on either side of the tube, but then square off the front section here and use the frame on either side here as a additional wall for the front here. So what that allowed me to do is to finish adding the skin on the front here and glue these mandibles in place. So now they're on either side of the tube. The tube itself is loose. I haven't glued it in place just yet. The other thing that I did since the last update was to do some filling in between each of the pieces of skin as they're joined along here, and started sanding the underside down to make it a little bit more level. So I also, since I sanded it, also added another layer of epoxy putty to level this off. So once this is dry, I'm going to finish sanding it and leaving it that. The plating, the second layer of plating is going to be on top of these pieces, so I'm not really worried about it being 100% level, but just enough so that the gaps aren't appearing too badly. So the next thing I need to decide on is whether I'm going to cut any holes into the skin to add equipment bays. Sort of on the fence about doing that right now. Um, I haven't added skin to the top section of the vessel. Sort of holding off for that until I finish the underside. Um, but if I plan on cutting any holes, I'm going to have to do it soon because once I add the skin on the top, I will not be able to access the underside for adding any sort of equipment bays that have greebles in it. Um, it's just, I won't be able to get my hand anywhere near that. So I'm sort of, like I said, I'm sort of on the fence. I sort of like the idea of having equipment on the top as opposed to having any holes into the skin and exposed greebles. Um, that makes it a little too much like the Millennium Falcon when you start adding equipment bays into the skin, into the frame, and that's not what this model is all about. So I'm probably going to hold off doing something like that, and then just adding the equipment on the top. I don't know. I'll decide probably in the next day or two that if that's the direction I want to go, because I definitely want to add the skin now onto the top section and finish that up. Now that I know how much work is involved in doing it, it just would be nice to get it done and out of the way. The other thing I'll have to do is once I start skinning the top, I'm gonna have to make sure any wiring that I have is run within the frame itself. I haven't made up my mind like what I'm going to be lighting in the front here. The cockpit for sure. I'm thinking of adding a couple of headlights on the front here, very similar to the Millennium Falcon. So that would be where I'm going to have some wiring run through these mandibles. Um, Definitely wiring here. And then the engine's also going to have wiring as well as the gun wells on the top and bottom. Um, but these are a lot easier to get to because it's exposed, so I'm not worried about running any wiring there. It's really just the front section here. So yeah, we're in a good spot right now. Once this is dry, then I'll just sand it down, level it off, and call it a day for the top on the skin on the bottom of the model. So yeah, I think we're in a good spot at this point. The skinning's done on both the top and underside, as well as the side walls. So prior to adding the skin on the top, I ended up running some wire. So I got wire here for the cockpit, and I decided I'm going to be lighting up the port and starboard guns. So I have wiring all ready to go there as well. You'll notice that in the back here, there are some lines drawn, and that's just a reminder of where the frame is in the back here. My plan is to add a battery pack and an on and off switch in the back here. So I need to have access to this back area for the wiring and the battery pack and the on and off switch. So I didn't want to cut into the frame, so this is just a reminder of where the frame is. The frame is important for keeping the back side of the model together. So I just wanted to make sure I'm not cutting into the frame at all. So you'll notice that I applied epoxy putty to level out these areas, as well as filling in some of the gaps between each of the skin pieces. I'm not really worried about having this epoxy putty here, and the fact I didn't totally sand it down flush. That's because there's going to be plating that's going to cover most of this, as well as structures. Like I'm going to have a structure running on the port starboard side as well as the front here. So I'm not really worried about getting it totally smooth or totally level. With the plating on top of a lot of this area too, quite frankly, I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference. If it does make a difference, I can always add more epoxy putty and, you know, sand it down as I'm starting to lay down the plating. So this part is done. In the next part, my plan is to work on the cockpit. I want to get that fully assembled, painted, and also lit, so that I can attach it to my tube, because this tube's going to run in the front here. So I just need to have that cockpit ready to go, because I think that's going to be the next step for this model. So yeah, so I'm in a good spot right now. It's a lot of work to do this. I wasn't anticipating this much work, to be honest. I thought it would go a lot quicker than it did. So that wraps up part 2 of the Rebel Privateer. Now that she's skinned, I can move on to that cockpit, which I've been anxiously waiting to do. So in part 3, as I mentioned, will be the cockpit, and maybe we'll start working on some other things on this too. I'm kind of interested to see how the plating and structures are going to turn out as well on this model. So that wraps up this part. Be safe, and see you guys next time.
It's alive! Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!